My name is Lionel Parisot, and today this presentation is actually a presentation of my master thesis defense, which was on the topic of the impact and relevance of non-fungible tokens on trademark protection of European wine brands, and which was a part of my MIPLM master program at CEP. This presentation can only serve as a short summary of the paper itself. During this course, I'll very briefly glance over the economy of wine, the technological aspects of NFT and how they intertwine, followed by a summary of the current state of trademarks in that sector in Croatia, France, and in front of the EU Intellectual Property Office. I shall also dive a bit deeper into two applicants' trademarks, which emerged in the course of this study. Following on that, I plan to describe the two principal approaches which can be observed in practice, alongside a fast flyover of the pros and cons of each, with which I will finally conclude the presentation. Digital technologies like NFT have already infiltrated our daily lives in many ways. This equally applies to private individuals and businesses, and the wine industry is no exception. However, given its specifics, it presents a particularly interesting case to look into, at least for me, with a special reflection on the impact on wine brand protection through trademarks. Wine has been a part of European identity since the dawn of civilization, with the activity of winemaking even being explicitly mentioned in the Bible, with Noah planting a vineyard in the book of Genesis and then getting drunk. From its presumed cradle in the Caucasus, winemaking has spread over millennia through the Middle East, Egypt, and the Mediterranean. The ancient Greeks expanded its production through southern Europe, bringing it to Sicily and the Apennine Peninsula, the so-called Magna Graecia, and then the Roman conquerors spread it across their empire, thus firmly fixing wine's foothold in Europe. Wine retained its importance even after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, thanks to the Church, which used and still uses wine in its rituals. And so it has remained until this day, with basically all of Mediterranean Europe being proverbial wine country, with the tradition of winemaking deeply rooted all the way back to the ancient times I just mentioned. Wine is important to Europe for more than historical reasons. The wine industry is a significant economic sector for the European Union, which covers most of winemaking in Europe. Worldwide sales of wine in 2022 amounted to $309 billion, while the wine market in Europe was almost $147 billion, a little under half the global market. This is significant given the relative size of Europe compared to the rest of the world, both economically and population-wise. The three largest exporters of wine, both in terms of value and of volume, are Italy, Spain, and France, while the three largest importers are the US, Germany, and the UK, followed then by France, the Netherlands, and Canada. So it is obvious that, with the exception of the transatlantic trade, the trade of wine is significantly intra-European, or at the very least, very Europe-oriented. The three countries with the largest production of wine in the world are Italy, with 49 million hectoliters, France 45 million, and Spain 35 million hectoliters. All three well ahead of the fourth placed and yet much larger United States with 22 million hectoliters, so less than half of France's production. These three EU countries I just mentioned alone accounted for 51% of the world production of wine in 2022, while the EU as a bloc accounted for over 62% of global production. 45% of the world's vineyard surfaces are in the European Union, with the countries with the largest areas in vineyard being Spain and France. And when talking in absolute numbers, it does make sense that Europe doesn't have the top-ranked country in wine consumption, simply because of the limited size of the populations in the various European countries. Therefore, the USA's first place makes sense. However, positions 2 to 7 all go to European countries, with France and Italy coming in second and third. It is also worth keeping in mind that while Italy and France's combined populations represent roughly 40% of the population of the US, their combined consumption is more than 140% that of the US. In 2022, the EU wine consumption accounted for 48% of the worldwide consumption. So we can conclude that Europe accounts for half of the wine sector economy, and the rest of the world is the other half, whereas the EU represents only about 5.5% of the world's population and around 18% of the global economy. So focusing on Europe in the context of this paper makes sense. Now, let's proceed to non-fungible tokens. An NFT, or non-fungible token, is a unit of data on a digital ledger in a blockchain, where each NFT can represent a unique digital item, and thus they are not interchangeable. This is in contrast to cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin or Ethereum, which are fungible and can be exchanged on a one-to-one basis. The digital item which the NFT represents can then be linked to a physical asset as well. Blockchain is a technology based on principles borrowed from accounting, namely the principle of double entry bookkeeping. The main blockchain file in blockchain records is analogous to the general ledger in an accounting record, and all the transactions since the start of record keeping are held in it, with the user accounts and their associated transactions in blockchain being kept in several locations, in essence, various servers across the globe. Which servers take part in the verification of each transaction? A core principle of blockchain technology is the unchangeability of transactions once recorded on a blockchain ledger, which is implemented by chaining transaction blocks together, with each block containing a summary or hash of its predecessor. Consequently, any alteration to even a single detail within a transaction would modify that block's hash code, causing a discrepancy with the previous block's hash. So, the NFT is actually not the asset per se, but rather a means of identifying the rights in an asset. It is an asset in the same way that a property deed is, since it serves a certain function related to another asset, the one carrying the value. An NFT uncoupled from the asset it is linked to has no purpose, no worth. And every NFT is linked to a unique piece of digital content. These tokens that represent ownership or act as a proof of authenticity, permanently recorded on a public blockchain network. But why would this be useful for wine? A report issued by the EU IPO Observatory back in 2016 estimated over €500 million of losses for legitimate industries of wine on account of the presence of counterfeits in the EU, which amounted to almost 2.5% of sales in the sector. Thus, authenticity is important in the wine industry. As an example of blockchain being used in wines, I would offer the Spanish winery Máquina y Tabla, which uses blockchain to offer their customers transparency into the production process of their wine, with every step of the way, number of barrels, chemicals added, etc., is being written in the blockchain. Another example of mixing wine and NFTs is the all-NFT wine brand Hello Fam from an Israeli winery. Their first release won't even be offered for sale or distribution except with its NFT debut. An NFT from Hello Fam corresponds to a 6-bottle case of the vintage, housed in a secure climate-regulated facility. The NFT becomes the digital extension of the physical product, the wine. It accompanies the product. It can help provide the customer with unique services, which could include valuation of the own wine bottle, perhaps a collectible, helping report the loss or theft of a collectible wine bottle. What is certain is that NFTs are a digital instrument that allows the transfer of ownership between the seller and the future owner in a completely secure manner. The NFT is therefore the projection of the physical product, the wine bottle or barrel, into the blockchain. I have then proceeded to analyze the publicly available data in the registers of certain IP offices. The trademark registers analyzed are the European Union Intellectual Property Office, EUIPO register, the French National Institute of Industrial Property Trademark Register, and the Croatian State Intellectual Property Office Trademark Register. In addition to those three, I have also considered international trademark registrations registered with the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, as per the Madrid Agreement, which designate either of the three jurisdictions, France, Croatia, or the EU as a whole. These three jurisdictions have been selected to show the current state of trademarks in a large winemaking economy, France, a small traditional winemaking European country, Croatia, and the EU as a whole, as the most likely target for trademark registration for international actors. I have firstly identified trademarks for wines in class 33 of the NIS classification, then trademarks for digital goods related to NFTs in class 9, and I have then cross-referenced them for any overlap, applicant or sign-wise. For consistency's sake, across the registers, I only included trademarks which have been published by July 21st of this year, 2023, and which have an application date on or prior April 30th, 2023. In Croatia, I have detected some 800 national trademarks for wine in class 33, of which 72% are in the name of Croatian applicants. No big surprise there. There was an interesting anomaly, however, with the second-placed applicant in number of trademarks, which was the township of Pag, a little over 3,000 inhabitants, 41 trademarks in 23 classes filed in the span of 2 days, which makes them owners of over 5% of the total number of trademarks covering wine in Croatia. For comparison, the Eurométropole of Strasbourg owns a similar number of trademarks, many aimed at the world-famous Christmas market, and only 2 are for goods in class 33. The other detected applicants varied from the largest Croatian alcoholic beverage producer, Badel, onto large Croatian wineries such as Kutjevo, to supermarket chains like Konzum, or frozen food producers in the form of Ledo. It was interesting to note that there are more registered international registrations designating Croatia than actual national trademarks with the same criteria. And in those cases, also large wine producers were the biggest applicants. Looking at NFT trademarks in Croatia, we can first note that there are very few such trademarks and that none of them are related to wines whatsoever. It makes sense that given the large territorial application of NFTs covering Croatia, with such a right would probably be more appealing at the EU level. And now, on to the French wines and their trademarks. Compared to Croatia's less than 1,000 marks, the French over 70,000 trademarks. Sounds huge, especially considering the very high national homogeneity of the applicants. This just goes to confirm the intimate relationship France has with wine. Turning to NFT trademarks, we see that the number of such trademarks in France surpasses the national Croatian wine trademark number. And in France, almost a tenth of these are directly linked to wine. I found it also interesting to note that the ratio of wine NFT trademarks to total NFT trademarks number is 50% higher than the ratio of wine trademarks in the total number of French trademarks, which just goes to show that wine and NFTs do seem to mix well in France. The highest number of applications for wine and NFT trademarks were in the name of MHCS and Château Petrus. As for the WIPO register in Geneva, with only around 1,500 international registrations designating France for wines, remember for Croatia it was around 1,100, and not one of those mixing wine and NFTs, it seems that here again, for non-nationals, it makes more sense to approach NFT exclusification at the EU level. I'm sorry. The EU IPO register confirms this assumption. While the number of trademarks for wine is almost half of that of the French number, the number of NFT trademarks is basically triple. So we see that the EU IPO is the preferred trademark register for NFT trademark applications. When looking at the NFT wine correlation, I again detected the same two applicants as in France, MHCS and Petrus, as being the most prolific. So it begs the question, what did they exactly file as trademarks in relation to the brand they own? The international registrations designating the EU do not contradict the analysis approach, given the sporadic number of wine and NFT trademarks designating the EU, and the fact that these two applicants I just mentioned, so MHCS and Petrus, surpass the number of such applications with just their combined number of applications. So we have seen that two particular applicants appear both in France and EU-wide with NFT trademarks in association with wines. MHCS, which stands for Moët Hennessy Champagne and Services, and Château Petrus. These two holders own the largest numbers of wine-related NFT trademarks in the EU. It is worth noting that both applicants are in the luxury wine sector. MHCS with champagne, a luxury product of its own right, and Petrus with a very famous and very expensive Bordeaux red wine. So, Moët Hennessy Champagne and Services is an entity owned by Moët Hennessy Louis Vuitton, a French multinational luxury goods conglomerate and the world's largest luxury goods company. The wines and spirits sector represents a $7 billion business for LVMH, and it positions MHCS as a global leader in the luxury wines and spirits segment. All 6 brands covered by MHCS's trademarks are for champagnes. Château Petrus is the opposite in size to MHCS and their series of different brands. Château Petrus is a 12-hectare vineyard, producing some of Bordeaux's most expensive wines, but only under that one Petrus brand. When looking at MHCS's list of brands for which an NFT trademark application was filed, we can summarize it as a list of some of the biggest champagne brand names in the world. Unfortunately, I really do not have time to analyze each brand and its economic significance, but I trust most of us have heard of at least some names on this list, and know of their economic weight. More details can be found in the paper. Image-wise, only the most recognizable aspects of only certain brands have been filed, in this case, the VCP logo and the Dom Pérignon shield. MHCS has clearly opted to cover the most significant aspect of a brand, the name. Now, on to Petrus, a wine producer making only one wine, as I said, so there is only one brand to protect. Therefore, exclusifying the different aspects, especially visual, which characterize the brand, makes sense. Focus on the actual appearance. All the more so, given that in the digital environment, it is most likely the appearance which is perceived by the consumer, in addition to the name, of course, because computers are still not able to replicate the taste and aroma of exquisite wines for us. All in all, we can therefore differentiate two approaches, the active and passive one. Both MHCS and Petrus are representatives of the active approach, yet at the same time showing how it can differ, depending whether the focus is placed on the brand name or the brand appearance. On the other hand, the passive approach is exemplified in all those winemakers who did not file any application, despite it making sense for some of them, especially luxury wine producers. For example, we have seen a total lack of any Croatian wine applicants, although some Croatian wines would fall in the luxury category. For example, the wines of the winery at Ilok, which were served at King Charles's third coronation, which is likely a status symbol sufficient to be considered a luxury product, because it is fit for a king, quite literally. The active approach is, of course, more expensive in the short term, but it buys peace of mind. It could prove problematic down the line due to potential issues with proving genuine use, but there is time to prepare for it. The passive approach is more of a gamble, which might eventually be proven a winning one if the jurisprudence goes in that direction, but this is still not certain. We still do not know what degree of similarity digital products associated to NFTs will have in comparison to their physical counterparts. This is very important for the actual sphere of exclusivity achievable with the trademarks and the question to be dealt with in due course by the jurisprudence in Europe, but whose answer is deeply important. Until then, we can only wait. For now, no definitive answer has taken shape in EU case law, given the relative novelty of NFTs and the problems which they would pose in trademark law. Essentially, the question which approach to adopt is a risk management one, and specific to each brand and its business interest. In conclusion, there are different approaches to the mixing of NFTs and wine from a trademark law viewpoint. What is apparent is that NFTs are non-negligible for the wine industry, and that there is a divide between those who adopt them and those who ignore them. Only time and future European case law will give reason to one side more than the other. But until then, the jury is still out. I thank you for your attention, and I invite you to feel free and reach out to me on this email address if you have any more questions related to this topic.